who do I want to become? Then from there, what do I need to do? Like, what's one step I can take today? And then it's all about setting reminders and doing the mental fitness, whether that's 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, just to remind ourselves of this is where I'm heading, bringing in, again, gratitude, or bringing in some stoicism, for example, and focusing on, okay, this is what I can control today.
You're watching Young and Profiting Podcast on YouTube. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Hala Taha, and on Young and Profiting Podcast, we investigate a new topic each week and interview some of the brightest minds in the world. Before we get started, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified every time we drop a new video. Hey, Marc, welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
Thanks, Hala. It's great to be here. It's a real honor. I've been a huge fan of yours, as you know, and I'm excited to jam.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on your show earlier in my career, Behind the Human. And you've got such a great podcast. And now you have a new book called Personal Socrates that is coming out really soon. When does that come out exactly, Marc?
It is, depending on when this releases, it might already be out. It's coming out October 19th.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
As of
we'll
now,
put it
it's
out
next week.
Yeah, we'll put that out. This episode aligning with that release date. So I can't wait to get into that book and to talk about journaling and the benefits of that. But before we get into that, you have a really interesting backstory. You actually started in the corporate world like me, and then you became an entrepreneur, and you were in big pharma. You were doing marketing and branding, and then you had this big idea to start an app for journaling, because at the time, this was like 12 years ago, they didn't have anything like that. And so you decided you would quit your job, team up with, I think a relative, and start this app. So really cool stuff. Talk to us about that transition, how you got into journaling, and how you ended up jumping into entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so crazy to me to reflect back, because when I was in the corporate world, I was doing well. I was, you're used to this, or you know how it works. I was moving jobs every 2 years, essentially, right? Kind of climbing that ladder. And I was actually quite happy in the role. I was working with really great people, learning a ton, and never had any desires to jump into the world of entrepreneurship. It kind of just happened out of not wanting to regret trying this new idea that you had brought up, which was the journaling app Keo. And that came it came from about 8 or 9 years of actually using a practice like journaling. Because when I was hired out of university, I started in sales. We all went through the same training. It was like a 4-week intensive, fly to Montreal. We're all going through the same program. And I remember thinking, well, how possibly can I stand out in a sales role if we're all being trained the exact same way, right? So I just started getting up a little bit earlier, not much, and started reading positive content. And year after year, essentially, and I mean, happy to share, like that first year or second year in sales, it was top sales rep in the territory, and I really credit it to all of that early morning like mental fitness, which is not what I called it at that time. But essentially what was happening in reading blogs and different books and websites, you start coming across very similar mindsets when it comes to personal development and keeping your mind thriving. And journaling was one of those practices. And I remember coming across all of these different interviews, and it wasn't journaling from the perspective of what I used to always get when we started the app, which was, oh, you're talking about the 12-year-old girl writing her diary about the boy at school, right? And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. But no, I'm talking about what I've been seeing with these big, powerful life and work questions that the people we're following and reading their books are pausing to think about. So I would write those questions down, and then the next morning when I would, get up a bit earlier to do the practice, then I would reflect on them based on where I was at in my life. And I did that for, like I said, a good solid 8 years. And eventually, though, at that time, then grew really frustrated with the digital solutions that were available, because I was traveling a lot for conferences and whatnot. So I was always doing this practice on my phone or on an iPad that I had really kind of teched out in the sense of no notifications. It was kind of like a sanctuary in terms of technology. But there was nothing out there from an app perspective that would take the combination of knowledge, and in my case, questions, and link that up with a guided journaling practice. Now there are options, but essentially that's what sparked the idea of Keo. And I linked up with my brother-in-law and co-founder of the app, said, here are my frustrations. Would you be interested in trying this out? He was and still is an entrepreneur, so that gave me a little sense of confidence or security that, okay, I'm not just jumping in by myself here. And then we started working on it.
That's awesome. So the app was pretty successful out the gate. From my understanding, Apple was featuring it, and you got like 86 million impressions on it and lots of active users, but you didn't figure out how to really monetize it. You didn't figure out the business model. And I can really relate, because when I was, my first entrepreneurship gig was the sorority of hip hop, strawberryblunt.com. It was a blog site that I blew up. I was so popular hosting parties. I had a big name out there in the tri-state, but I wasn't monetizing. I didn't figure out the business model. So even though we had a big brand and people knew about us, I wasn't making money and I had to shut it down. And something similar happened to you, where you ended up shutting down this app and deleting it. So my question to you, since you're like the Mr. Question guy, is what questions were you asking yourself that got you to that decision to shut it down?
Well, it was actually a question sparked by an interview I'd done with Scott Belsky, who's now in the book as one of the profiles, and it was just around the idea of, why am I building this, and also, do I still have the same level of passion and conviction that I did when I first thought of the idea, when we started the business? Do I have that same level of passion now? Because that's what you need. If not, do you have the same level, if not more, frankly? Because that's what you need, as you know, to kind of push through that messy middle and continue. And the answer at that time was just no. I had lost that passion along the way. We were financially strapped, mentally at the max of our journey, and we had learned enough for along those 3 years of creating the app that we could continue to iterate it. And I am confident that we would have figured out the proper kind of user flow and would have been able to make our business model work. But we weren't naive to the fact that wasn't going to happen in the next iteration. And we were already on the third development team. Now we had a homegrown kind of Toronto-based team, which was way more expensive. And there was just not even a sliver of certainty that, okay, well, if we do this, it's going to result in, at least we'll start covering our, expenses, our server costs. So that's what led to the decision of, for me at least, I had found the path and the work that really lit me up, that I didn't know was, kind of my true calling and purpose. But that vehicle, which was the app, is something that sparked that, that world for me. And I'm grateful for that. But that, was time for that to close. And I trusted the journey enough, or the path, knowing that just because I'm in that space, right, of self-development, that if it's not the app, it'll be something else. But the work in general, the practices, the prompts, and all of that, that's what really mattered. And I'm curious to see from your perspective, when you were going through it with your venture, the big learning I had there was to never fall for your own hype. Because we had 86.9 million App Store impressions, all these features. We were collaborating with massive brands like LinkedIn and Lego and VaynerMedia, which was just providing all of this almost like false confidence that, we were just going to thrive. But we hadn't figured out the business model yet.
Yeah, honestly, now I look back, and this is probably not what you're expecting to hear. I look back and I wish I kept going.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I realize now that having a brand is so powerful, and I just had the wrong business model. And had I just kept tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until I found something that had product market fit, or got a TV show or whatever it was, it probably would have been another 6 months or a year, and I would have been really successful faster. But everything happens for a reason, and I'm not positive that would have happened, but having a brand is powerful. And you just need to figure out how to monetize that brand. So anyway, every failure is a stepping stone. And I'm sure you learned a lot from that experience that you use now. So what are you up to these days?
Well, interesting enough, I do feel like I have kept going. It's just like I said, the product or the offering or the service has changed. It's changed into a book. It's changed into, corporate mental fitness activations and speaking and things like that. But it's all the same content and practices and prompts. So I mean, for me, it feels like the path just kind of got, I took a bit of a right turn there, but I'm still going up the same mountain essentially, or following the work that lights me up. So that's what led to the book, though. The book was, when I deleted the app, I mean, I don't want to speak too lightly of that, because I remember looking at that Apple dashboard and thinking, okay, I see 86.9 million people, and the next step is to hit delete from App Store. I mean, how could we fail at such a colossal level? Like, what would all my ex-colleagues think?
Yeah.
You can probably relate to this. I remember
100%.
telling them I was leaving, right? And they're like, there was this feeling of, oh, I have an idea too. Like, you're so courageous for going to do that, right? You could feel that. And here I am now, like, what am I going to say to those people? And I also didn't want to go back to that industry, because I had found the space that really lit me up. But now I just deleted the vehicle that was keeping me in there. So it wasn't until, doing everything possible to dial into the present moment and unleash as many gratitude practices as possible, which I was picking up through all the interviews and the content in the app, that I eventually got to this realization that we are all, myself included, one question away from a completely different life. And that question for me happened to be, what do I want for my life? Which pulled me out of essentially out of a depression that was heading into a deep depression, and who knows where next. But that was enough to pause the looping narrative to then put a plan together. And then that led to the next question, the question after that. And as it turns out, there's a whole method to this madness, which is the Socratic method.
Yeah, so I want to dig really deep into that. Let's talk about people who are in a rut, because a lot of people are out there struggling. Maybe they lost their job from COVID. They still haven't really found their new job. And people are in a rut. So you were in that place at one point, and you just said you used a lot of gratitude practices that you had learned over the years from interviewing people on your podcast. So talk to us about some of those specific methods. What did you do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a formula, a really easy formula to remember that works in really any situation. And that is to first get clear, and then you can start acting with intention. And whether that's practices, decisions, or conversations, then that will lead to an expansion of possibility or opportunity. The first step in that whole process is you have to pause the internal narrative, because it's nearly impossible for us to think clearly and do our best work when our mind's fogged with fear, anxiety, uncertainty, which is how I felt after deleting that app. So again, just thinking of, having something as simple as a list of 5 or 10 things that without question will put a smile on your face, and that you can default to that list. And that's different for all of us. And that's the point, is we have to find the things that light us up. I was taking a lot of walks during that time. I never skipped any workouts at the gym. Like, my number one goal during that period was to keep my mind and body as healthy as possible, because then your mind's clear. Right? It's no different than if you take the visual of a physical room and you open a door to a room and you see it's full with boxes floor to ceiling, and there's a door in the back there, but you just can't see how to get to that door or where it is. Our minds are the same thing when they're flooded with emotion or an abundance of decisions to make or relationships that are bothering us. So once we start clearing that out, then we just have to trust that our mind's going to do the work and connect the dots, and we'll know exactly which path to take. Kind of easier said than done, but the easiest way to pause that loop is to dial into these practices or activities that will put a smile on your face, right?
Yeah. So let me reiterate this really quick. The first step is to get clear.
Yeah.
The second step is to live intentionally. And the third step is to expand possibility. And then you have questions that align to each one. So let's really drill down here and teach people how to do this. So what are the questions for each bucket?
A good quality question to me is a question that's well-timed and relevant in your life. So if I were to ask myself the question again of what do I want for my life, it would serve as a nice check-in, but it doesn't have the power that it did, a few years ago, which pulled me out of a depression. So the first thing is to really sit down, and if you have the book or if you're looking at any other prompts, is really to follow your intuition in terms of, what feels right for you. Starting with a clarity type question, and that's something that's progressive as well, right? So what do I want for my life? You're going forward in movement. Or, to borrow some of the prompts from James Clear, who has a profile in the book as well, but just understanding, like, who am I optimizing to become? right? Like, am I climbing the right mountain? Because we can feel like we're doing the right things. We feel busy. But if we're busy doing the things that we don't want to be doing, or that's not leading to the life that we desire, then we're kind of wasting that time, right? So again, getting clear with questions on like, who do I want to become? Then from there, what do I need to do? Like, what's one step I can take today? And then it's all about setting reminders and doing the mental fitness, whether that's 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, just to remind ourselves of this is where I'm heading, bringing in, again, gratitude, or bringing in some stoicism, for example, and focusing on, okay, this is what I can control today. For example, there's profiles on Ryan Holiday in here and Marcus Aurelius. And then that's all you have to remember, because if you're doing the first 2 steps of getting clear, then living with an intention and doing the practices that will help, this possibility and opportunity shows up by default because you can see it. Right? Coming back to that room, you can see the door is right there. The path is like this. This feels right. I'm going to follow that journey.
Got it. So in terms of the reminders, are you saying basically scheduling time in your day to reflect on what you got clear on? Like basically you're asking yourself questions, then you get the clarity statement, whatever that is, and then you're saying set reminders to think about that information that you're clear on now?
Yeah, so the reminders this is critical, because if the whole intention of all of these practices is to pause us and pause the autopilot. Because if we just let ourselves go in regular society, just like nutrition or exercise, I mean, we'll be led down a path that is probably not the most healthiest for us, for example, right? It's just like going to a grocery store. I mean, if you just follow the aisles and the marketing, you're not going to come out with a cart full of healthy groceries. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. So you've got to be intentional with what you're doing and have a plan when you're going in. So it's no different with our mind. I remember Apollo Ono. So he was on the show and he has a profile in the book, and he's, at least at the time, he was the most decorated Winter Olympian in U.S. history, a short track speed skater. And I'll never forget, because he, I write about it as here are the Olympic, the Olympic reminder system that Apollo uses, and it's Post-it notes. He starts with just getting clear on his objective and his goal, and then he looks around his house and thinks of the places that he sees the most often, whether that's your fridge or I think he had them in his closet, just little Post-its with an intention. And it has to resonate with you, but it could be today I want to feel energized, or I'm working towards X. And just, again, subtle little reminders. I use my iPhone wallpaper on the lock screen. And what's fun about that is, like, now we get all these screen time reminders. So you can see I just prime my mind 78 times today from picking up my phone. And I just have some one-liners on there that I need to hear right now, right? Small things like, in the process of obviously this book launch, it's so easy to go down this comparison track. Okay, well, it's ranking here in Amazon. Like, what does that mean? So-and-so did this, but I'm here in comparison to them. And just to cut that and just have a one-liner saying, be present, forget about comparison. I can remind myself of that 78 plus times a day.
I love that. I did something similar, not knowing what I was doing. I always make my passwords something that's some sort of a goal. So like for a while, I was really impatient, and I had a really big problem with like wanting to get promoted and having to kind of wait in line. And all my passwords were like patience, like in a bunch of numbers, Or when I was building YAP, I was like #1 podcast, And then every time I type it, I'd be like, yes, I'm working on my #1 podcast, So I think just any way that you can remind yourself of your goals, and then the more that you repeat stuff and listen to yourself, the more that you start to believe it and take the actions you need to actually get things done.
But that's the intentionality part, right? You were doing it, and it's simple, and simple works. We stick with that. Yeah. I had the same thing. For the longest time, I had a password that was just happiness.
I love that. So talk to us about why journaling works. And is journaling only sitting down at a desk and writing on a piece of paper?
I'm so glad you asked that.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that, because most of us think of journaling as sitting down and writing kind of pen to paper, or, like in our case when we had the app, using an app to do it. But if you really break down the actual practice, the practice is reflection. And that is the #1 theme that has come up with 200 plus interviews with all these, exceptional humans is they take time to still their mind and think. And again, that's to help pause that autopilot and make clear decisions. So I don't care whether you're writing in a book, or if you're doing that in a notebook, or if you're taking a walk and, taking the walk without music or a podcast and just going on that walk with a question in mind, for example, that's reflection, that's journaling. But the key is that you're taking that time to do it. So for me, from my experience, a good 70 or 80% of the people I've interviewed have some sort of meditation practice, but 100% of them have a practice like this where they're taking time to think. So figure out in your own routine if that's the morning, which is usually a little bit easier to do because then, life happens afterwards. So you can start the day owning your morning, owning your day, start with a prime mind, asking some questions like, how do I feel today? Where do I feel that in my body? Do I feel anxious? Is that tightness in my chest? And sometimes, or often, just acknowledging that we're feeling that releases it. And then you don't carry that into the day. Again, coming up with that, clogs your mental real estate, and really hard to make really great decisions or perform at our best when we're clogged like that. So small, that takes minutes. I do it, one of the staples in my routine is as my coffee's brewing, I have a copy of Ryan Holiday's book, The Daily Stoic, and I just read one passage. It's one page, and it's usually a really solid perspective shift that no matter what's going on in my life right now, I'm like, oh, someone else has been through that. This is kind of how they handled it. It's not that bad. I can focus on either what I can't control or what I can control, and sometimes that's all I need. And then you start the day motivated and excited and ready to go.
Yeah, I love that. So in terms of the questions that we ask ourselves, do you tend to ask yourself like the same question every day, or are you switching it up depending on what's going on in your life? Like, how do you decide what question you're going to ask yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. This comes back to, a decade ago, essentially, when the practice started for me. And it was when consuming content or knowledge or wisdom, then searching for those pieces or those nuggets, those questions that were there that then felt right to reflect on in my life right now. So that's the reason the book is set up in the way that it is in these 2 to 4 page profiles, and that they're all loaded with an opening prompt, is that they're all different. Whether it's, Kobe Bryant or Maya Angelou or Stephen Hawking, they're all different, and they're designed to meet you where you're at. So I would just encourage people to, not put so much pressure on ourselves, but to really land at a question that feels right when you're going through the book, or if you're reading a book, to really just slow down and think about, okay, so, what am I trying to get out of this, right? How can I apply this information, or how can I apply this podcast to my life right now and make it, applicable, for example? And then I'd really encourage, no matter what you're doing, to always have some sort of gratitude element to it. Whether it's journaling, whether it's meditation, I typically do everything possible to have some sort of questions around, what can I celebrate about today? Or a great practice on a Friday, for example, 3 questions. You get to, let's say, midday Friday, not at the end of the day so that you're rushing to finish your day, but in the midday, take 15 minutes and just open up your calendar and ask, what did I learn this week? What would I have changed about this week? Maybe the way you reacted in a conversation. These are all just little nuggets of data that normally just pass through and we don't think about. And then lastly, what can I celebrate about the week? And it's just a great way to finish off the week because, again, you're not carting over all this mental, narratives and loops and stuff into the weekend. You're starting the weekend fresh. You're starting Monday fresh. And you just learned a ton about what you just did in the last 5 days, which is a lot. We forget about that, right?
Yeah.
There's so much to celebrate, but we don't remember these things unless we stop and think about them.
I really, really like that actionable Friday gratitude activity. That's really great. It's a good social media post too. You gave me an idea.
Awesome.
I think it will go viral.
Amazing. Tag me.
I will. Okay, so let's talk about the name of your book, Personal Socrates.
Yeah.
Pretty sure everybody knows who Socrates is. He's known as like the great thinker, but I don't know much else about him or the Socratic method. So can you break that down for us?
Yeah, and I was in the same place, and I actually hated the title of the book originally. It was from Joey, the founder of Baron Fig and the publisher. But as I was explaining kind of what I was picking up through all the podcasts and also how I was using questions, he was like, "Oh, you're talking about the Socratic method." I'm like, Socratic what? I mean, again, I know the same level of detail that you just described. So I went into it, and just started doing some Google searches. And I was, first of all, blown away that Socrates was born in 469 BC. So he invented this method of questioning that's literally stood the test of time. All of us are doing it in some capacity, but without really thinking about it. And I was thinking, well, how do you then modernize the method so that we can be a little bit more intentional with this practice and that we can get the most out of it? Because if you ask me, there's 6 question types in the Socratic method. I can't even rhyme those off from memory to you, and that's the problem. I mean, there are questions around seeking clarity or challenging assumptions and things like that. But if I can't remember them, then we're not going to just intuitively apply the principles, right? And that's where the structure of the book and what we've been talking about of making it a 3-part process of first getting clear, then getting intentional, and then that by default the next step happens, right? And so that's the backbone of the book is based on the Socratic method, but it's grouped in a way that we can all remember that first we need to get clear on what we want to do, right? And then from there, take action. And here are a whole bunch of questions and stories and practices that help support, where you're trying to head.
Let's give some examples. You mentioned that Kobe Bryant is in the book. What kind of questions did Kobe ask himself? How did he set intention and then, get the opportunity on the other side?
Yeah, so Kobe's profile was really fun to work on, and the research was a lot of fun and insightful. And his opening prompt is, how do I get to the rim? Which has nothing to do with basketball. It has everything to do with how he was a master at his own internal negotiation. So through the research and shortly after that opening prompt, the whole concept behind his profile is that Kobe was human like the rest of us. I mean, when his alarm went off at 4 a.m. to get the extra workout in, the 4th workout from which was one above his team members, I mean, he didn't want to get up either. And there was this whole, I went in this rabbit hole about how, we all can negotiate ourselves out of getting out of bed, like in microseconds, right? I mean, we're so warm, it's cozy in here. I'll do the workout after. In my case, it happened when I was writing the book. I'll write in at 2 p.m. instead. I have a window there. And what happens? Life happens, meetings happen, you don't write. Or you don't go to the gym, for example. So for him, he started to really focus on getting clear on why he was getting out of bed to put in that 4th workout. And for him, it was very clear to win an NBA championship, right? For us, we need to figure out what that thing is. And then the intention is, as soon as the alarm goes off, you can use something like Mel Robbins' 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 principle, which is in the book as well, to just rise and get up. Because once you're out and you start about your day, and again, if you start stacking on and layering on these practices and you land in your kitchen, you have the Post-it note, again, reminding you of why you're doing this, or you're making your coffee and you're reading a passage and something related to the book or Stoicism, all of these things stacked up, these micro moments of reflection just get us closer to where we're trying to head.
I love that. So you interviewed Mel Robbins. I think she's coming on my podcast soon. I'm so excited.
I didn't interview her. I included her principle in Kobe's profile.
Oh, well, let's talk about that principle since we brought it up. In case people haven't heard about it, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So her backstory is that she had a lot of anxiety at one point, and eventually just decided that I just heard her on a podcast recently tell this story. I think she was watching, or she saw a commercial where there was a rocket launching or something like that, and she made the decision that tomorrow I'm going to launch out of bed. Like, enough's enough. I'm not going to loop into this anxiety. And the next morning she just said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that was her trigger. At 1, get up. And now she uses that for everything. And so do I, frankly. So I just stack that within Kobe's profile because I think, I haven't interviewed Kobe, so I don't know exactly the question he was asking while he's in bed. I know he was clear on his intention, but if we can loop in Mel's principle with that, now it's super powerful, right?
Yeah. And so the idea is, don't just keep hitting the snooze button.
Yeah.
It's so unhealthy, to just not want to get out of bed, keep hitting the snooze button, then you wake up groggy. Once you hear your alarm, it's just let's go. Yeah. Get out of bed, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, get up.
And you can use it for anything,
I love
right?
That too.
An email you're hesitating to send, or if you're trying to, cold message someone or give them a call, just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go, do it.
Yeah, I love that. So what other cool stories do you have in your book that you want to share, something that you feel would teach our listeners something impactful?
Another mutual contact or friend of ours, Naveen Jain, he has a profile in the third part of the book, which is around unlocking possibility. And I like to share this one because for the most part, we talk about these practices from the standpoint of when you're, emotionally charged or you're trying to process anxiety or depression or whatever it is, right? But then there's a whole other side of these practices that relate to just unlocking, your imagination. So in Naveen's profile, it's all about the language that we use and slowing down and writing out, imagine if, right? Imagine if I did this or started working on this project. What do I see transpiring here? What can I do? And this is a fun exercise to do right before you go to bed because it just sets your mind into this realm of possibility. And then when you go to sleep, your mind continues to work on that path, for example. So not only you're putting your mind in a positive and happy creation state, right? Because we're either in a creation state or we're in a survival state. We're never in both at the same time, and it's either or. So practices like that and that kind of language brings us back into that creation and that motivated state where we're excited and we're pumped. So his practice is something that I use often, even for this book. Just imagine if this happened or that happened, and it doesn't mean that it's going to, but it's at least charts the path, and then you start feeling more clear. I'm like, okay, well then maybe I need to do this to get to that end result. And all of a sudden people start showing up or start surrounding you, for example, right?
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably really helpful for pessimistic people who have trouble kind of expanding from reality or what they feel like is certain.
Yeah.
I think that when you're optimistic, it's kind of easy to imagine and kind of just say affirmations and believe things that are unrealistic. But when you're pessimistic, maybe a tool like that would really help you think outside the box.
Yeah, well, and it brings us back to, I have a 5-year-old, and that's essentially how he speaks. Right now, he doesn't know he's doing this, but he's like, imagine if I was strapped on a rocket ship and I went to the moon, right? It's just that childlike imagination that, we all had. It's just as life goes, for many of us, that gets tampered down. We also stop asking as many questions until we hit these big roadblocks in life, and then we start asking the deep questions, right? And the thing with that, the other thing when you're asking these questions, and this one's from Chip Conley's profile around curiosity, but the most curious person in the room is also the most present. And people feel that presence, right? You and I feel that we're engaged with each other versus, looking over the camera or doing something else. You can feel when someone is not present or engaged. So they win, you win, and you're training your mind to see the detail. And when you see the detail, then you see the detail when you're putting together a brand strategy or a pitch deck or your research or whatever it is. So it's all these little micro moments of training that really prepare us for the big game, which is life.
Yeah, so true. So there's one quote from your book that really caught our eye, and it was with Coco Chanel. And you said that confidence with presence breeds irreplaceability. So tell us about the exercise that we can do to foster legendary confidence like Coco Chanel.
Yeah, Coco Chanel was fun too. That was a really hard profile to write because, again, she's one of them. About half of the profiles are people, anyone that's alive today I've interviewed, and the ones that are not, I haven't. So the ones that I haven't, those were hard because, like Coco Chanel, there are biographies written on her, and that wasn't my intention, right, to write a biography. So I was trying to figure out, from her life and what I could research, how can we leverage the questions and the practices, or bring in practices that will help us? And with her, it was just this. It's interesting because everyone knows the brand, obviously. She herself had this presence of arriving in the room, from what I've gathered in my research, that people would just remember when Coco entered the room. And, she, it's the same thing when people show up with Chanel No. 5. I mean, it's been around for so many years and it still holds that presence. So the practice in the profile is for us to pause and think, well, what presence am I leaving behind? Or what presence do I want to leave behind when I'm in the room with someone, right? And again, just slow down and think about that, because whether we like what we leave behind or don't, we're leaving something behind, right? We're leaving an energy, or we're leaving people feeling a certain way. So I'd rather spend a bit of time thinking about, well, I want people to feel energized and excited after a conversation with me. I mean, that's the greatest gift I can give, because I like to feel energized and excited, and that works for me. So then how do I need to show up? Or if you're giving a presentation or a keynote, how do I want the audience on the other side to feel after I'm done speaking? And again, you're just setting the intention, and your mind goes and pulls the things that you need to do to make that real. So Coco was just really fun to, dive into her history and world, and also have the parallel of actually her brand and products doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. Super cool. I mean, this is really powerful stuff. It's super simple, but people don't take the time to ask questions, reflect, set intentions, and attack the world with a perspective of how they want to attack the world. I feel like a lot of us are on this like hamster wheel, and we just do the same thing every day, and we don't step back to reflect. So this was an amazing interview. Thank you so much. The last question that I ask all my guests is, what is your secret to profiting in life?
Oh, well, I mean, it's doing everything possible to pause the autopilot and to think. Like you just said, it's so easy to just spin, and I fall into this all the time, but the more I deploy these practices, the more self-aware, and the more I can catch myself and give that micro pause to make a different change or make a different decision and see the path forward, right? Or the one that feels the most right. So yeah, it's presence for me.
Yeah, I love that. And where can our listeners go to learn more about you and everything you do, and where can they get the book?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place is just one link, which is behindthehuman.com. That's just my personal website. The podcast is there, the book's there, and Amazon, Baron Fig. By the time you listen to this, if you're listening to this on launch week, there's still a whole bunch of launch bonuses, so free mental fitness guides that I wrote up that will accompany the book, sleep guides, moonshot thinking guides, and all the prompts that link to them. So yeah, and let me know. I mean, I'm obviously, you can probably tell I'm a bit, obsessed with questions. So if you've got some great reflective questions that have made massive changes in your life, I mean, tag me in those prompts and let me know, and I'll keep them on the list.
I love that. This is awesome. I know you mentioned the moonshot thinking and the sleep guides. Why don't you send me those links? We'll pop them in the show notes, because I think my listeners will love that. And if you guys are tuning in, check out my episode with Naveen Jain. We talked all about moonshots, and it's really awesome stuff. Marc, it's always such a pleasure to speak with you. I hope your book launch is super successful, and I can't wait to come back on your podcast when I've got something new to talk about. And just so great to chat with you like always.
Absolutely, Holly. You're always welcome.
Thanks, Marc.
Thanks for listening to Young and Profiting Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please write us a review or comment on your favorite platform. Nothing makes us happier than reading your reviews. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, and on social media. I always repost, reshare, and support those who support us. You can find me on Instagram at YAP with Hala, or LinkedIn. Just search for my name. It's Hala Taha. Big thanks to the YAP team as always. This is Hala signing off.